Good morning, welcome to CATEX-TV. My name is Frank Fortunato. This is a live broadcast from Princeton, New Jersey. Today is Friday, December 11th, 2009. It's 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in the U.S. It's 4:30 p.m. in London, 12:30 p.m. in Hamilton. In Mexico City, it's 10:30 a.m. If you need to reach us during the broadcast, you can phone in toll-free at 1-866-67-CATEX. Overseas, our AOL instant mail address is CATEX-TV. On this day in history, last year, Bernie Madoff was arrested. The financial pages were a tizzy with possible implications of a billion-dollar-plus Ponzi scheme. Mr. Madoff is now residing in jail, where he'll be for the next 150 years. So we're finished with him. Today's birthday, Senator John Kerry, who would have been the President of the United States, except he was photographed parasailing or wind sailing wearing a skin-tight outfit, is 66 years old today. Now to our main news. The main news continues to come from Copenhagen. This is really going to be a mega event next week. A new draft agreement came together this morning at the Copenhagen Climate Talks that pulled together the main elements of a global agreement, but left some pretty big holes on financing and cutting greenhouse gas emissions. Why are they leaving the holes? Well, they're waiting for the arrival of the world leaders next week. They're going to fill in the gaps. The 6-page draft document distilled the disputed 180-page text, the negotiating text that we discussed the day before yesterday, in which the obligations of industrial and developing countries were laid out. News of the agreed-to document came as EU leaders agreed to commit over $3.5 billion US a year until 2012 to a short-term fund to help poor countries cope with climate change. The EU also conditionally lifted its commitment to reduce carbon emissions by 30% below 1990 levels over the next decade, depending on, of course, on better commitments by the US and Canada. The draft agreement which came together in Copenhagen this morning is less specific than other proposals, and it attempts to bridge the divide between rich and poor countries. It now leaves everything to be decided by the more than 110 heads of state, including President Obama, Chinese Prime Minister Wen Jiabao, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, and most of Europe's top leadership, who are going to arrive in Copenhagen in 1 week for a landmark summit, which could well decide the fate of the world, depending upon how you view this. According to an analyst with the Natural Resource Defense Council, this text will be the focus of the negotiations from now on. The paper says global emissions of greenhouse gases should peak as soon as possible, but controlling carbon emissions should be subordinate to the effort to wipe out poverty and developing the economies of the world's poorest nations. The draft calls for new funding over the next 3 years by wealthy countries to help poor countries adapt to changing climate conditions, but mentions no figures. The UN's top official on the scene has suggested a total of $30 billion US. One observer said it made no specific proposals on long-term help for developing countries. That's the gaping black hole. Outside the negotiating complex in the Danish capital, police detained 40 people in the first street protest linked to the conference. About 200 people rallied in the downtown area where corporate CEOs are meeting to discuss the role of business in the fight against global warming. So it's into this group that a week from today, President Obama will descend. He's in the air right now, having left with his wife, having left Oslo after his acceptance of the Nobel Peace Prize. He should be landing in Washington probably in about an hour from now. The U.S. economy had some news. November retail sales rose more than expected. This was a surprise. This now boosts hopes that the all-important U.S. consumer sector will continue to support the fragile recovery. The report was a surprise because the nation's retailers have been reporting generally lackluster results for the start of the Christmas holiday season. And of course, in the United States, consumer spending accounts for 70% of overall economic activities. However, retail sales rose 1.3% in November after a 1.1% gain in October. It was the biggest advance since sales jumped 2.4% back in August. Economists have been expecting a 0.6% increase, so it came in at 1.3%, so that's very good. The stock market is up about 26 points right now. News from Holland that the Dutch financial services group ING, which came close to collapse last year, said this morning that this month it intends to repay half of the 10 billion euros provided by the Dutch government during the height of the financial crisis. ING now joins other lenders in Europe and the U.S., like UBS of Switzerland, a Bank of America, and repaying at least some government funds earlier than anticipated. The Dutch government injected the funds into ING in October of last year by purchasing non-voting preferred shares. ING also received a state guarantee of about 21.6 billion euros worth of U.S. mortgage-related assets this year. The repayment is part of ING's efforts to reinvent itself as a better focused financial business. It's also under pressure from European authorities, and it's going to divest itself of its insurance operations and sell some of its asset management operations. One observer says ING will emerge as a more specialized and leaner company. Here's an interesting story. AM Best is coming out with a report on Monday. They gave some advance information on it today. It concerns the Bermuda market. Best is saying that the forecast of further pricing pressure has Best warning that the cost of prematurely spending capital that has been garnered by insurers and reinsurers could be grave for the Bermudian market if a major catastrophe occurs. Other negative factors such as underpriced casualty business and possible significant reserve charges over many years have overshadowed Bermuda's strong 2009 financial results. AM Best's special report on Bermuda will come out on Monday. It says, quote, from an underwriting perspective, 2009 results are being bolstered by considerable reserve releases from prior years. Where have we heard that before? That have masked a meaningful deterioration in the more recent accident years. During 2009, reserves have shaved 6.6 points off the loss ratio of the Bermudian market compared with 8.2 points in 2008. AM Best believes that this trend is not sustainable and the impact from favorable reserve releases will diminish over time. For now, AM Best said the Bermuda market's reserve position appears adequate following favorable loss reserve development for several years, but there are fears that this may become pressured within the next 2 years, with business lines raising the most concern, including surety and credit, directors and officers, and longer tail casualty business such as workers' comp and other liability lines. It's going to be interesting to see how the AM Best report translates out into the analyst report for the stock markets. And we'll follow this and see if there's any correlation or not. Well, we made a couple of jokes earlier this week in response to Steve Poizner, the Insurance Commissioner of California, with his effort to force reinsurers and insurers to divest themselves of Iranian-related assets. And we joked about how insurance companies, in their responses to the Commissioner's action, seem to be maintaining their own separate foreign affairs departments. Well, it looks like they might need them after all, because today the United Nations Security Council, pictured here, which is usually the scene of very, very weighty discussions, the Security Council is considering imposing sanctions on Iran, including a ban on reinsurance cover for Iranian tankers going through the Persian Gulf. This is according to the Wall Street Journal today. The measures, if enforced, will call on member states to enforce reinsurers based in their countries not to offer cover to Iranian oil tankers. However, the Wall Street Journal notes that as China and Russia are unlikely to support any serious sanctions, the reinsurance sanctions are at this point improbable. I'm not too sure about that. This might be one area because of reciprocity. The United States' individual 50 jurisdictions might be able to react against a Russian or a Chinese insurer that provides such cover to an Iranian ship.